In the spring of 1912, two mining companies uncovered a Nevada cave with a secret so shocking it altered everything we have always known about history and anthropology. For a while that felt like centuries, access to this cave was highly restricted. Only a selected few could access the cave. This made people ask questions like, what is this cave? What does it hide? And why are the authorities hiding whatever they discovered from the public? It wasn't until later we found out that what was discovered and hidden shouldn't have existed in the first place. And this thing's existence proves that the human race's origin isn't as simple as we were told. This is the never-heard story of the Lovelock Cave and the mysterious gigantic skeletal remains found in it. Although John T. Reed will eventually be one of the people who investigated these stories, his encounter with these caves and tales about giants began when he was younger. Sometime in 1886, Reed tells a story of one of his first encounters with the Indian caves. Reed, who worked as a clerk for his father, was once tasked with finding some of their missing horses. He and some Indian locals, who were of the Paiute tribe, were given this assignment, and they set out to find the missing animals. However, they could not find these horses at the end of the day, and had to camp out. On the second day, there was a heavy downpour, and Reed suggested they stay in the nearby caves. However, his suggestion was rejected by the Indians. When he asked why, they told him they were scared of evil spirits. Of course, Reed paid little attention to the presence of these supposed evil spirits, but was fascinated by the cave. As they continued their search, Reed, about 15 at the time, noticed arrow marks and broken arrow tips around the cave entrance, and asked how these came about. His companion, Natchez, told him an interesting story. A long time ago, an Indian tribe came into this country from the southwest. This Indian tribe was red-headed, and they were very tall men. Natchez tells him about these strange gigantic beings that the tribe called Ka, which means eaters of tool. Tool is a fibrous water plant that the Ka giant tribe ate and used to build their boats. The Ka tribe came from a region by the Pitt River. They had a strange culture different from the other Indian settlers. They built their homes on some of their boats and were not friendly. They had great heights and intimidated the other tribes who were of smaller stature. Conflict soon began between the Paiutes and the giants, who were cruel and in some accounts known to be cannibals. Some accounts say the red-haired giants greatly terrorized the other tribes, and all captured prisoners of war met a cruel fate. They were finished off in a disheartening way, or worse still, eaten. As the fear and terror spread, other tribes set aside their differences and came together with the Paiutes to fight back. A massive battle begins with both sides losing fighters. However, the united tribes were relentless and soon began to gain the upper hand. When the giants noticed they were losing, some escaped by boats, but the locals ambushed the fleeing giants on their way. However, some made it out safely and attempted to settle in a new area towards the west. Unfortunately for them, the news of their unfriendly way of living had gone ahead of them. They were attacked here and eventually had to return to the area across the Pitt River where they came from. Many others who could not leave by boat fled to hide in a cave. Unfortunately for them, the Paiutes were determined to end the giants' terror, so they did something terrible. Blocking off the entrance to the cave, they lit dry hay and sagebrush and threw them into the caves. The smoke and fire further killed the escaping giants, and the tribes were delivered from the terror of the Ka. By the next morning, Reed was eventually taken into the cave. Here, he met a huge pile of guano, which is bat feces. Although he was disappointed with what he saw inside the cave, his interests would return in later years. Just before Reed heard this story about the Paiutes and Seeteeka tribe, Sarah Winnemucca Hopkins, the daughter of Indian Chief Hopkins and sister of Notches, admitted to the truth of these stories. 3 years before, she published a book on the history of the Paiutes and their not-so-friendly, huge neighbors. She also had a dress she made from the red hair of some of the giants. This was proof of her interactions with the giants. Almost all religious and cultural backgrounds agree that men as we know them today were not the first or only species to walk the earth. From the Old Testament's account of giants born of an unholy union between women and fallen angels, to the Vedas, which speak of huge revered beings, these stories abound. One of the accounts of the origin of the Seeteeka, as told to Reed, was that the creator made both Seeteeka and the Paiutes. The Paiutes, also known as Numa at the time, spoke the same language as the red-haired giants. Over time, heated conflicts began between the tribes. In his attempt to end this conflict, the creator separated both tribes. He sent the Seeteeka to the Humboldt Sink and moved the Numa tribe to the Carson Sink. Although both tribes had been assigned to different areas, the creator was pained by their conflict, and one day decided to take a walk someplace in his grief. He goes towards the Walker Lake and places his head on a piece of rock to cry. It is believed that a huge river was created by his tears, and the place where he laid his head still has an impression of his forehead to date. When Reed eventually grew up and became a mining engineer, his interest was drawn to the Lovelock Cave again. Sadly, an expedition of this size was expensive, and he did not have the funds for it. But as fate will have it, by 1911, the Lovelock Cave was generating lots of interest. However, this was for commercial reasons. It turns out that huge deposits of guano used for making fertilizer and gunpowder had been discovered at the cave. Reed remembered his first time inside the cave and the huge store of guano he found as a 15-year-old. Reed began to reach out to parties interested in guano, but most of them turned down the offer to extract the bird feces in the cave. But all it takes is one yes, and he finally got it from 2 people. Between 1911 and the following year, 2 mining engineers, David Pugh and James Hart, sent their team to dig and excavate guano at Lovelock Cave. While they excavated huge deposits of guano, they found something else. After months of mining and transporting guano to fertilizer companies, the upper soil within the cave had become depleted. This is when David and Hart's team made some interesting findings. Lying just a few meters within the soil were skeletal remains. However, these were no ordinary remains, as they measured between 7 to 8 feet. It is estimated that over 60 skeletal remains of these abnormal heights were found there, but this was not all. There were other interesting finds here, like a huge sandal sample, as well as a giant-sized fingerprint in the cave. With these discoveries, Hart and his team, who had no experience working with archaeological remains, lost some of the artifacts found here. To preserve these findings, they reached out to an expert, Dr. J.C. Merriam of the University of California. Merriam in turn contacted the University of Nevada. Hart also spoke to the Smithsonian Institute about what they had uncovered. It is possible he wanted to sell them some of the items, but the Institute declined. They informed him they only received donations and did not have to purchase whatever historical remains were brought to them. The University of Nevada came to the rescue by sending Dr. Loud to investigate what the miners were unto. Beneath the guano-filled cave, they found mummified remains of what looked like a man with a rope around his neck. There were also about 4 female remains. These discoveries were enough to spark numerous searches for anything that could teach us something about the past. In the years that followed, more skeletal remains and artifacts continued to be uncovered. Although Reed did not mine guano, he was busy with his mining enterprise. He was also obsessed with documenting everything he could find about these early settlers. He interviewed lots of people as the number of artifacts increased. I believe it was easy for him because the natives trusted him. He and his father had worked in the community a long time ago, and the locals considered him a friend. I also feel he wanted everything he heard as a young boy to be true. As the number of artifacts grew, an exhibition center called the Lovelock Exhibit was set up. Here, the discovered items were placed in a shed and displayed for interested persons to see. Sadly, this shed was mysteriously burned down. At this point, I wanted to know if Lovelock was a peculiar case, so I did some digging. What I discovered was mind-blowing. As I studied Reed's interests and the discoveries at Lovelock Cave, I quickly realized this was not the only place with skeletal remains. The Serpent Mound of Ohio is one of the most interesting places with skeletal remains. Like Lovelock, the bones found here measured up to 8 feet in some cases. On more than one occasion, the bones disintegrated into dust as soon as they were exposed to air. As the nation uncovered spots with some of these unusual findings, another amateur explorer was digging around Catalina Island. His name was Ralph Glidden. It is estimated that Glidden found as many as 3,781 skeletons on the island. This happened between 1911 and 1930. Within 2 centuries, over 1,000 accounts of skeletons measuring at least 7 feet have been reported. Most of these findings were documented and sent to the one place founded to keep such discoveries. However, this place, which was supposed to preserve and keep these precious remains, soon began to act in a way that appeared quite suspicious. As the nation of America uncovered pieces of evidence that pointed to the presence of an earlier race and civilization, the discoverers sent the found items to the Smithsonian Institute. This institute is about the largest collector of ancient relics and everything that helps to shape our knowledge of civilization. At least this is what they say they do. Strangely, as most of the discoveries uncovered in these caves and other places were carefully transported to the institute, some of them appear to have disappeared over time. Nice wordplay, by the way. In an attempt to find some explanation for the mysterious discoveries, some geologists reached out to the Smithsonian Institute to allow them to inspect some items with them. Sadly, they were denied access. The reasons for this were quite weird. The Institute said some of the findings were not reliable. They also said some had gone missing, although they acknowledged receipt of these items. It is easy to see that the Smithsonian Institute was not transparent. The reason for this came from a school of thought that it held. You see, the Smithsonian Institute believes that civilizations develop internally. What I mean by this is that all civilizations begin and end with the actors of that unique civilization. There was no massive migration. People from Asia stayed in Asia, and people from Africa stayed in Africa. There was no mixing or large-scale migration. However, the discovery of skeletal remains, writings, and other items found in caves like Lovelock and other places suggests otherwise. What these findings reveal is that people moved around. It also implies that there were original dwellers of America before anyone else that history speaks of. The Smithsonian Institute does not agree with this school of thought because it goes against everything we have always known and everything they told/taught us. When I looked up some of the actions of this institute, I discovered that this was not the first time it had denied access or resources to people who wanted answers. In 1909, 2 renowned explorers who worked for the institute, G.E. Kincaid and Professor D.S. Jordan, were denied access to funding when they found some astounding items in a cave in the Grand Canyon. What is strange about this story is that the Institute initially sent them some funds for their expedition. When they discovered the cave they were exploring had much more to offer and requested additional funds, their request was denied. Sadly, this was not the only thing that happened to them. Something else much more tragic happened, but more of that later. Following the discovery of the skeletal remains of the Lovelock Cave, several questions have come to the fore. One of the most prominent is why all traces of giants have disappeared in our time. I mean, did all the CT-Ka tribe die off? Some of the stories about this huge tribe reveal that there were survivors. After the battle with the Paiutes, some of them returned to the region they were believed to have come from. If this is so, why are there no giants in our world today? How about red-haired people who descended from the CT-Ka tribes? Is it possible they exist but are being kept away from the general populace? All descriptions of these giants point to a superior race. This race had brute strength, possible immunity to illnesses, as well as access to advanced knowledge. In some of the caves, explorers or miners found decoy ducks. These ducks were used for duck hunting. The Paiutes also admit that unlike most Indian tribes that ate their food raw or semi-cooked, the giants knew the act of cooking and roasting. What I'm trying to say is this race showed superior intelligence. With these skills, they were better suited to survive and thrive. If we assume that some of them survived, why has the science community been unable to track down some of their descendants? Again, we must remember that this started in Nevada, the same state with the mysterious Area 51. Are there preserved samples or secret breeding grounds for these superhumans the world is unaware of? All of these are just questions that I like to ponder. When we consider the destruction of lots of these samples during the mining exercise of Pugh and his team as soon as they were exposed to the atmosphere, we realize a limitation here. Incidents like these make it difficult to study the properties of the findings. How genuine were they? Were they fraudulently implanted in these caves and other locations? There have been incidents of supposed discoveries that turned out to be fake. How about the images that fill the internet space? Our world is filled with content creators who will do anything for social media engagements. In 2002, a Photoshop contest saw the internet flooded with images like this, and other convincing photos that suggested the discovery of archaeological items. These pictures dilute the authenticity of whatever claims of skeletal remains are found. From a scientific standpoint also, it is medically impossible for humans to exist as giants. This is because the skeletal frame of humans is carefully designed to hold only specific volumes. When the body mass increases, the volume increases exponentially, and the skeleton is expected to support this huge volume. This is practically impossible, as the bones may be destroyed if such heights or growth ever happens. That being said, I do not completely discard the possibilities of giants. The Guinness Book of Records has entries of the tallest people on Earth, some of whom include Sultan Kosen from Turkey, Suleimana Abdul Samed with a height of well over 9 feet from Ghana, and others. However, none of these people fit the description of the powerful militia giants whose remains litter the Lovelock Cave. People like Suleimana and Sultan suffer from a medical condition known as gigantism that makes them grow beyond measure. This must not be confused with the kinds of giants in this video. Giganticism is caused by the oversecretion of adenoma into the pituitary gland. The lives of people affected by this are a daily struggle, as their abnormal growth puts pressure on some of their organs. Usually, this health challenge leads to a higher tendency for affected people to die early. But then again, the NBA has proved that extremely tall people can be athletic, so it is possible. There are also cases of people having abnormally long hands or limb growth. If the remains of such people are found decades after they pass, they might be classified as giants. But whoever said that giants were normal beings? Some of the skeletal remains found showed 2 sets of teeth in the mouths of these beings. Their bones were also far thicker than normal humans. This can only mean one thing: they are different from humans. Again, Sarah's claim of a dress given to her by the giants could not be substantiated. In a recovered manuscript containing a brief interview between Reed and a local related to Sarah, who claimed to have seen the dress, he admitted that he never knew how she got the dress or what became of it. In his words, they were not inquisitive by nature, so he did not ask Sarah how she came by the dress. While I'm tempted to ask if Sarah had any reasons or motives to lie about a thing like that, I also remember she wrote a book about her people. Is it possible a story about receiving a dress made from red hair was her way of creating a publicity stunt? Moreover, the accounts of the giants differ. While some people who received the stories through oral tradition agree that the giants had red hair, others do not agree with this. Again, while some say the giants were terrible man-eaters, the story of a young Paiute proves otherwise. This young boy once stood by the sea and confronted the giants. The giants came for him in huge numbers and captured him. After this, they took him to their camp and hung him upside down for a while. But things got interesting afterward. The young man said he was later released and stayed with a family for not more than 2 days. After this, he was transferred to another family for 2 more days. Later, he was released back to his people and given gifts, including a dog. The Paiutes, who did not keep dogs, thought this was a great gesture. So what do we go for? Do we accept the account of a terrifying race of human eaters, or a group of super tall humans minding their business? Either way, these variations in their accounts blur the lines. The search for the truth remains. Each discovery presents us with a step to uncovering our past. However, just like G.E. Kincaid and Professor S.A. Jordan, there are chances that the truth is being suppressed.